As you start working on your rough draft for the case study, a couple of things you need to keep in mind are, number one, to follow that outline that's up there. It is in 9 paragraph format for the essay. If you don't get to 9 paragraphs, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll do poorly on the essay, but I want you to stick with that outline to the best of your ability. It will yield the best results, trust me. Um, so in the first paragraph, you're going to want to do a outline that just briefly explains what your argument is. So I'm going to use the case of baby S44 as an example. So let's say that you are talking about that case. What you're going to do is you're going to say the actual format of your thesis isn't as important, right? I'm not looking for, by the end of this essay, you will realize that, blah, blah, blah. But I need to know what your argument is. So if you're talking about in the case of baby S44, I would say something like, by the end of this essay, you will see that what Crystal did was wrong, and my findings will be based on utilitarianism and deontology, or care ethics and virtue theory, right? Whatever whatever case study you're doing, you need to make sure to mention that case study in the first paragraph and explain which way you went with, right? Did you think what Crystal did was right, or did you think what Crystal did was wrong? And that you're backing up your argument based on 2 ethical theories. So it's very important. Make sure that's in the first paragraph, okay? The second paragraph needs to explain the case in detail. So you don't have to, of course, reiterate everything in that case study, but anything that's important that you're going to reference, you need to explain. You need to write this essay for a person who has never read your case study. Okay, so you need to pretend, if you will, that you are just letting a stranger read this essay and they have no idea what the case study is about, right? So first paragraph, thesis, and a short description of what you're talking about. Second paragraph, case study. Third paragraph, you need to introduce your first ethical theory. So in the case of baby S44, I'm going to pretend like I'm using utilitarianism, and I'm also going to pretend, for the sake of argument, that I think what Crystal did was wrong, okay? So for utilitarianism, I would say I'm going to use this to explain that. So the third paragraph is just going to be an explanation of utilitarianism, just exactly what it is. Outline that it's consequence based, greatest good for the greatest number, we're all about happiness, etc., right? All that needs to be outlined. Then paragraph 4 is application of utilitarianism to the case. So if I was going to do this, I would say something like, let's see, the greatest good in this case is that Crystal would have gone ahead and had an abortion. If she would have done that, Tom and Linda would have been happy by her choice. She also could have saved her children grief by uprooting them and moving them. She should have taken care of her own kids that she had. And she also is doing the wrong thing, of course, by violating a contract, right? So the greatest good would be to go ahead and have an abortion and do what she agreed to at the beginning. Now, I could go ahead and counter that argument and say something in the 5th paragraph, like, of course, someone may say that the greatest good is the sanctity of life, and I understand that. However, through my essay, you'll see that what she actually did was wrong, even though it gave an infant the chance at life, right? So the 4th paragraph, application of utilitarianism. 5th paragraph, kind of a counter argument to what you said, acknowledging an opponent's point of view, but also arguing that they are actually incorrect. 6th paragraph, you're going to explain your next ethical theory. So I would do deontology. If I'm doing deontology, I'm going to explain what the categorical imperative is. I'm going to explain that it's duty-based, that it's all about the action itself, etc., right? And then if I'm going to apply the categorical imperative to that case study, I would say something like, what Crystal did was wrong because she violated a contract, so she lied. Lying is never okay, even if it's for a good ends, which I'm sure is what Crystal thought. But I would say if she didn't want to have an abortion, she never should have signed a contract stating that she would have an abortion. Um, if we lived in a world, now I'm going to apply the categorical imperative to it, right? So if we lived in a world in which people signed contracts and had no intention of following through with that contract, what logical world would that lead us to? And that would be to a chaotic world in which no one ever believed anything when they signed contracts. And this is, of course, a world we don't want to live in. So if I'm universalizing the idea of keeping up with contracts, right, which is a good idea to universalize, what Crystal did then was wrong. Now I could make a counter argument in paragraph 7, of course, and say something like, or maybe I'm at paragraph 8 now, 8, and say something like, of course, what Crystal did was at least understandable to a degree because she thought that life was very important. And of course, a deontologist would be against murder. But I then would back it up and say, even though murder is wrong for a deontologist, she shouldn't have signed, and maybe she felt like abortion was murder. Maybe that is how Crystal felt. She still should never have signed a contract stating that she was going to have an abortion. She never should have done that. She should never have falsified how she believed. And then the final paragraph is going to be just a reiteration of everything, restatement of thesis, right? Sometimes you may not need additional paragraphs for your counter arguments. You could just slip those counter arguments into the end of your first argument. Does that make sense? So you may not necessarily get a 9-paragraph essay. It could be more like a 7-paragraph essay. It just kind of depends on how you want to work with that. But stick with the formatting in general of that outline I gave you because that's going to be the best thing for you to do. Finally, when you are arguing for your case study, make sure you argue one way. So don't say, according to utilitarianism, what Crystal did was wrong, but according to deontology, what Crystal did was right. Don't do that. Whatever your case study is, pick a direction or a way it should have been handled, stick with it and argue it out. I'm not worried about what you actually think. You could argue something that you totally disbelieve. That's fine. I just want to make sure that you are taking the case and making an argument for or against what happened based on 2 ethical theories, right? And you're just going to keep going with that. Don't act bipolar, so to speak, right? Try to focus on which direction you want to head and go that way. Remember that if you have any questions or you need me, email me or text me and I can go over any ideas that you have. Finally, your rough draft is due June 18th. You will not be given leniency in regard to when this gets to me because I am going to turn around and give you feedback within a few days. So you can't turn this in late. If you turn it in late, you will not be getting feedback on your case study, and you desperately need this feedback in order to turn in your final, which remember is your final case study. So it'll be after I've made corrections to your rough draft. You'll go in, look at those, look at the feedback I provided, and make those corrections. And that's your actual final assignment that's due on the day of the final. I hope this helps, but if you're confused about anything, please let me know. Bye.